The wind howls across the Altai mountains of Siberia, carrying with it the whispers of 1,000 winters and the echoes of footsteps that fell silent 40,000 years ago. Snow drifts through the mouth of Denisova cave, settling over the very ground where another kind of human once knelt by firelight, crafting tools with hands remarkably similar to our own, yet belonging to a lineage that has vanished completely from the earth. In the darkness of this ancient sanctuary, beneath layers of sediment that chronicle the rise and fall of ice ages, lie the fragmentary remains of our closest evolutionary cousins, beings we know only as the Denisovans, a shadow people whose existence was unknown to science until barely 15 years ago, when a single finger bone no larger than a pea revealed the genetic signature of an entire lost world. Imagine standing here in this cave mouth as twilight settles over the taiga, feeling the weight of deep time pressing down upon your shoulders, knowing that you are gazing into the very place where multiple human species once shared the same shelter, competed for the same resources, and perhaps even loved across the boundaries of evolutionary divergence. The Denisovans emerged roughly 370,000 years ago and spread across vast expanses of Asia, from the frozen steppes of Siberia to the soaring peaks of Tibet, possibly even reaching the tropical islands of Southeast Asia, yet by 30,000 years ago, they had disappeared completely, leaving behind only ghostly traces in our DNA and a handful of bone fragments so small they could fit in the palm of your hand. This is the story of their vanishing, a mystery that challenges everything we thought we knew about human survival, adaptation, and the delicate balance between coexistence and extinction. Before we begin this journey through deep time, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where in the world you are listening from. And at what time of day are you watching the sunrise over mountains like these ancient people once did, or settling into the quiet darkness that mirrors the caves where their stories still whisper? Picture the moment when everything we thought we knew about human evolution changed forever. It was 2008, and in a small laboratory in Leipzig, Germany, scientists were examining what appeared to be an unremarkable fragment of bone, no bigger than a child's fingertip, recovered from the sediments of Denisova cave by Russian archaeologists who had been patiently excavating the site for decades, layer by meticulous layer, uncovering the remains of woolly mammoths and cave bears, stone tools and fire hearths, but never imagining they held in their hands evidence of an entirely unknown branch of the human family tree. When the DNA results came back, the scientific world fell silent for a moment before erupting in astonishment. This tiny piece of bone contained genetic material that was clearly human, yet unlike anything in the known fossil record, neither Neanderthal nor modern Homo sapiens, but something else entirely, a third kind of human that had been walking this earth alongside our own ancestors for hundreds of thousands of years, completely unknown to science until that moment of revelation in a German laboratory, when ancient molecules spoke across the vast gulf of time to announce their existence. The researchers named them after the cave where they were discovered, Denisovans, and as more fragments were found and analyzed, a picture began to emerge of a people who had lived in this remote corner of Siberia for over 200,000 years, adapting to ice ages and interglacials, hunting the massive creatures of the Pleistocene, and somehow surviving in one of the harshest environments on Earth, while developing sophisticated tool technologies that rivaled those of any other human species. Yet they remained hidden from us until the 21st century, their entire existence compressed into bone chips so small that most would have been overlooked or discarded by earlier generations of archaeologists. What makes the Denisovans even more remarkable is not just their late discovery, but the profound impact their genes continue to have on human populations today. In the highlands of Tibet, people carry Denisovan DNA that helps them breathe easily at altitudes that would leave most of us gasping for air, while in Papua New Guinea and the Philippines, indigenous populations carry up to 5% Denisovan ancestry, genetic gifts that may have helped their ancestors survive in tropical environments and resist certain diseases. These ancient people, who vanished from the earth tens of thousands of years ago, are still helping their genetic descendants thrive in some of the most challenging environments on our planet. The cave where they lived and died sits at an elevation of 700 meters in the Altai Mountains, a limestone chamber that served as shelter for multiple species of humans across nearly 300,000 years of occupation, making it one of the most important archaeological sites in the world for understanding the complex story of human evolution and interaction. Within its dark chambers, Neanderthals and Denisovans not only lived at different times, but actually coexisted, intermingled, and produced hybrid offspring, including one individual whose DNA revealed she had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, the first direct evidence of interbreeding between distinct human species ever discovered. As you stand in this cave today, running your fingers along the limestone walls that still bear the soot stains of ancient fires, you can almost feel the presence of these vanished people. Imagine the sound of napping stone echoing off these walls as a Denisovan craftsperson shaped a scraper for processing hides, or the low murmur of voices speaking in a language that has been silent for 40 millennia, discussing the weather patterns that would determine their next hunt, the movement of the herds across the steppes, or perhaps the strange new people with slightly different faces who had begun appearing in their territory, carrying unfamiliar tools and competing for the same resources that had sustained the Denisovans for countless generations. Deep beneath the cave floor, archaeologists have uncovered what amounts to a library written in stone and bone, an archive of human activity spanning nearly 300,000 years that tells the story not just of the Denisovans, but of the complex interactions between multiple human species in this remote corner of Asia. Layer 15, the deepest archaeological level containing human artifacts, holds the oldest evidence of Denisovan occupation, dating to around 200,000 years ago during a warm interglacial period when the Altai Mountains would have been clothed in forests of birch and pine, with meadows full of wildflowers stretching between groves of trees where deer grazed peacefully in the long summer twilight. The stone tools found in these ancient layers tell a remarkable story of technological sophistication and cultural adaptation. The Denisovans were creating implements using advanced techniques that archaeologists recognize as early Middle Paleolithic technology, including lever cores that allowed them to produce multiple sharp flakes from a single piece of stone, and specialized scrapers with carefully retouched edges that microscopic analysis reveals were used for processing animal hides, working wood, and perhaps even cutting plant materials. These are not the crude choppers of our earliest ancestors, but sophisticated tools that required planning, skill, and cultural transmission of knowledge across generations. What makes these discoveries even more intriguing is that the Denisovan tool technology shows remarkable similarities to the Acheulo-Yabrudian cultural complex found in caves throughout the Levant, thousands of kilometers to the southwest, suggesting either long-distance cultural exchange or parallel technological development across vast geographic distances. The implications are staggering, as they hint at networks of communication and shared knowledge that spanned continents, connecting human populations across the entirety of Eurasia in ways we are only beginning to understand. The animal bones found alongside these tools paint a vivid picture of Denisovan life in the Altai. They were accomplished hunters who targeted a remarkable diversity of prey, from massive woolly rhinoceros and steppe bison to more delicate roe deer and wild horses, adapting their hunting strategies to pursue everything from forest-dwelling species during warm interglacials to cold-adapted megafauna during glacial periods. Cut marks on these bones reveal sophisticated butchery techniques, while evidence of burning suggests they roasted meat over carefully tended fires, extracting maximum nutrition from their kills in an environment where calories were often scarce and survival depended on making the most of every successful hunt. But the Denisovans were not the only inhabitants of the cave during these ancient times. Nearly a quarter of the bones from layer 15 belonged to carnivores, particularly wolves and dayholes, suggesting that humans were actively competing with these predators not only for prey animals but potentially for the cave itself, a three-dimensional chess game of survival played out across the harsh landscape of Pleistocene Siberia, where the difference between life and death might come down to who controlled the best shelter during the brutal winter months when temperatures could plummet to -40 degrees Celsius and the wind would howl across the steppes like the breath of an ice giant. The density of artifacts in these layers is extraordinary, more than 3,000 stone tools per cubic meter, suggesting intensive occupation by groups that return to this cave generation after generation. building up a cultural continuity that lasted for tens of thousands of years. Imagine the knowledge accumulated in this place over such vast spans of time, the stories passed down from elder to child, the seasonal rhythms learned and relearned, the intimate understanding of this landscape developed through countless lifetimes of observation and experience, all of it lost now except for these silent stones that once flew from skilled hands to shape the materials needed for survival in one of the most challenging environments humans have ever called home. As you kneel in the dirt of the cave floor where archaeologists carefully screen each handful of sediment for artifacts, you are touching material that was last disturbed by Denisovan hands hundreds of centuries ago, connecting across time to people who faced the same fundamental challenges we all face: the need for shelter, food, companionship, and meaning in a world that can be both beautiful and terrifyingly hostile. Yet they succeeded here for 200,000 years, 20 times longer than our own civilization has existed, adapting and thriving until something changed, something that would ultimately lead to their complete disappearance from the earth. To understand why the Denisovans vanished, we must first comprehend the immense power of climate change to reshape not just landscapes but the very possibilities for human survival. During their long tenure in the Altai, the Denisovans witnessed and adapted to numerous glacial cycles, each one lasting tens of thousands of years, and transforming their world so completely that the forests of one era became the tundra of the next, while rivers changed course, lake levels rose and fell, and the entire community of plants and animals on which they depended shifted like a vast, slow kaleidoscope across the Eurasian continent. During the warm interglacial periods, when the Denisovans first established themselves in the Altai around 200,000 years ago, the region would have been a paradise for hunter-gatherers. Mixed forests of deciduous and coniferous trees provided habitat for red deer, roe deer, and wild boar, while open grasslands supported herds of horses and aurochs, and the many lakes and streams teemed with fish that could supplement their diet during lean times. The cave itself would have been surrounded by a rich mosaic of environments, from dense woodland to flower-filled meadows, offering diverse resources within walking distance of their shelter and making the Altai one of the most favorable regions for human habitation in all of northern Eurasia. But climate is never stable for long in geological terms, and as the Earth's orbit shifted and solar radiation patterns changed, ice began to accumulate in the polar regions and spread southward in vast sheets that locked up enormous quantities of water and transformed the global landscape. As temperatures dropped and precipitation patterns shifted, the lush forests around Denisova Cave gave way to open steppes dominated by hardy grasses and scattered stands of cold-adapted trees, while many of the animals the Denisovans had hunted for generations either migrated south to warmer regions or became extinct, forcing these ancient people to constantly adapt their hunting strategies and survival techniques to a world in perpetual flux. The archaeological record from Denisova Cave reveals how the Denisovans responded to these climate changes with remarkable flexibility and ingenuity. During colder periods, they intensified their hunting of large-bodied animals like woolly mammoth and woolly rhinoceros, whose massive carcasses could provide enough meat to sustain a group through the harsh winter months, while also developing more sophisticated techniques for processing and preserving meat, manufacturing specialized tools for breaking bones to extract nutritious marrow, and perfecting the use of fire not just for cooking, but for rendering fat that could be stored as a concentrated energy source during times when fresh kills were scarce. Yet the ultimate challenge came not from gradual climate change, which the Denisovans had been successfully managing for 200,000 years, but from the extreme climate instability that characterized the period between 60,000 and 30,000 years ago, when rapid fluctuations between warm and cold conditions occurred on timescales of decades rather than millennia, creating environmental chaos that may have pushed multiple human species beyond their adaptive limits. During this period, the Altai experienced some of the most severe cold spells of the entire Pleistocene, with temperatures dropping so low that even hardy species like reindeer and Arctic foxes struggled to survive, while the growing seasons became so short and unpredictable that plant foods became virtually unavailable for months at a time. The sediment cores extracted from lakes near Denisova Cave tell the story of these climatic upheavals in microscopic detail. Pollen grains preserved in the mud, reveal how vegetation communities collapsed and reformed repeatedly, as temperatures swung wildly between glacial and near interglacial conditions, while geochemical markers indicate periods of extreme drought, followed by massive flooding, as weather patterns became increasingly chaotic. Imagine trying to plan a hunting strategy or choose a seasonal camp when the climate itself had become unpredictable, when the knowledge accumulated over thousands of generations no longer applied to rapidly changing conditions, when even the most experienced elders could no longer read the signs in the sky and predict what the coming season would bring. These climate records also reveal something even more ominous for the Denisovans. The period of their disappearance from the Altai, around 50,000 to 40,000 years ago, coincides with one of the most severe and sustained cold periods in the entire Pleistocene, a climate crisis so extreme that it may have pushed the northern limit of human habitation hundreds of kilometers south, leaving regions like the Altai uninhabitable for any human population, regardless of their cultural adaptations or technological sophistication. The ice was not just changing their world, it was erasing the very possibility of human life from vast areas of northern Eurasia, compressing surviving populations into smaller and smaller refugia, where competition for resources would have become increasingly intense and survival increasingly precarious for all human species. Hidden within the cells of people living today across Asia and Oceania, lies one of the most remarkable stories ever told by DNA, the genetic legacy of the Denisovans, who, despite vanishing completely as a distinct population tens of thousands of years ago, continue to influence human biology and survival in ways that scientists are only beginning to understand. When researchers first analyzed the complete genome of a Denisovan individual from the cave, they discovered that these ancient people had interbred with the ancestors of modern humans not once but multiple times across different regions and time periods, leaving genetic signatures that reveal a complex history of encounters, relationships, and shared survival strategies across the vast continent of Asia. The most remarkable example of this genetic legacy can be found among the people of Tibet, where nearly 90% of the population carries a version of the EPAS1 gene that was inherited directly from Denisovan ancestors through interbreeding that occurred tens of thousands of years ago. This gene variant helps regulate the body's response to low oxygen levels, allowing Tibetans to live and thrive at altitudes above 4,000 meters, where most people would suffer from chronic altitude sickness, turning blue from lack of oxygen and struggling to perform even basic physical tasks. Without this Denisovan genetic gift, the high plateaus of Tibet might have remained largely uninhabitable to humans, one of the last great frontiers on Earth to be settled by our species. But the Denisovan genetic contributions extend far beyond altitude adaptation. In Papua New Guinea and the surrounding regions of Melanesia, indigenous populations carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA, making them the most Denisovan people on Earth today, with genetic variants that appear to enhance immune system function and provide resistance to tropical diseases that have plagued human populations in these regions for thousands of years. Recent research has identified at least 126 different Denisovan gene variants that show signs of positive selection in modern human populations, meaning they provided significant survival advantages that helped them spread and persist across generations, despite coming from a species that itself went extinct. The distribution of Denisovan DNA across modern populations tells a story of multiple waves of interbreeding and migration that challenges our understanding of human expansion across Asia, while European populations carry virtually no Denisovan ancestry, suggesting that the ancestors of Europeans took northern migration routes that bypassed areas of Denisovan occupation. Asian populations show evidence of at least 2 distinct episodes of Denisovan admixture, indicating that our ancestors encountered and interbred with at least 2 different Denisovan populations as they spread across the continent, possibly separated by thousands of years and thousands of kilometers. The most intriguing discovery has been the identification of what researchers call super-archaic DNA sequences in some Denisovan genomes, genetic material that appears to have been inherited from an even more ancient human species, possibly Homo erectus, through interbreeding that occurred hundreds of thousands of years ago. This suggests that the Denisovans themselves were carrying genetic contributions from multiple archaic human lineages, making them not just a distinct species but a living repository of ancient human genetic diversity that had accumulated over millions of years of evolution and occasional interbreeding between divergent populations. The story becomes even more complex when we consider recent discoveries suggesting that Denisovan populations were themselves highly structured and genetically diverse, with distinct lineages occupying different regions of Asia and possibly adapting to different environmental conditions. Genetic analysis of the few Denisovan fossils available suggests that there may have been at least 3 major Denisovan lineages, one in Siberia, one that contributed to the ancestry of modern Tibetans, and another that had mixed with the ancestors of Papuans and other oceanic populations, each carrying slightly different genetic variants that reflect their adaptation to different environments and survival challenges. What makes this genetic legacy even more poignant is the realization that while the Denisovans as a distinct population vanished completely from the Earth, their genes continue to help millions of people survive and thrive in challenging environments today. A Sherpa climbing Mount Everest carries Denisovan genes that help him breathe easily at altitudes that would incapacitate most people, while a child in Papua New Guinea may be protected from malaria by Denisovan immune system variants that her ancestors acquired through interbreeding thousands of years ago. In this sense, the Denisovans never truly went extinct. They live on as part of us, their ancient adaptations continuing to shape human survival in the modern world. Yet, this genetic persistence also raises profound questions about what we mean by extinction and species boundaries in human evolution. If the Denisovans contributed significantly to the gene pool of surviving human populations, did they truly disappear, or did they instead become absorbed into the expanding populations of Homo sapiens through a process of genetic assimilation that preserved their most valuable adaptations while eliminating them as a distinct breeding population? The answer may be that extinction and survival in human evolution are not simple binary states, but complex processes involving the mixing, preservation, and transformation of genetic lineages across vast spans of time and space. Imagine the moment when 2 different kinds of humans first glimpsed each other across a valley in the Altai Mountains. Perhaps it was a Denisovan hunting party returning to their cave with fresh meat, their faces and bodies shaped by 200,000 years of evolution in the cold steppes of northern Asia, who suddenly spotted smoke rising from a campfire in the distance, smoke made by people who looked similar enough to be human but different enough to be immediately recognizable as strangers, newcomers to a land the Denisovans had called home for thousands of generations. What passed through their minds in that first moment of contact? What mixture of curiosity, fear, and recognition sparked across the evolutionary divide between species that had been separated for nearly 500,000 years but still shared enough genetic similarity to produce viable offspring together? The archaeological evidence from Denisova Cave reveals that these encounters were not isolated incidents, but part of a complex pattern of interaction that lasted for tens of thousands of years, with different human species not only sharing the same landscape but actually using the same cave as shelter, sometimes simultaneously and sometimes in succession, creating a palimpsest of human occupation that speaks to both conflict and coexistence in the deep past. The cave contains layers where Denisovan and Neanderthal artifacts are found together, suggesting either direct contact between these populations or at least rapid succession in the use of this prime shelter site, while DNA extracted from cave sediments shows evidence of multiple human species present at the same time periods. The most dramatic evidence of these interspecies encounters comes from the genome of Denisova 11, a bone fragment that revealed an individual whose mother was a Neanderthal and whose father was a Denisovan, the first direct evidence ever discovered of interbreeding between distinct human species. This young woman, who lived approximately 90,000 years ago, represents the biological proof of relationships that crossed species boundaries, suggesting that the different human populations in the Altai not only encountered each other but formed intimate bonds that resulted in hybrid offspring who carried the genetic legacy of both parental lineages. But Denisova 11 was not unique. Further analysis of Denisovan genomes has revealed multiple episodes of interbreeding with Neanderthals, including evidence that one Denisovan individual had Neanderthal ancestry dating back several generations, while another showed genetic contributions from a Neanderthal population that was distinct from those found in Western Europe, suggesting a complex web of relationships and gene flow between different human populations across Eurasia that lasted for tens of thousands of years and involved multiple distinct lineages of both Neanderthals and Denisovans. These genetic discoveries force us to reconsider what we mean by species boundaries in human evolution, and to imagine a world where the edges between different kinds of humans were fluid and permeable rather than fixed and absolute. The Altai appears to have been a zone of contact and interaction where different human lineages met, mingled, and sometimes merged, creating genetic combinations that would never have existed if these populations had remained isolated from each other, while also maintaining enough reproductive isolation to preserve distinct evolutionary trajectories over hundreds of thousands of years. The implications extend beyond the Altai to suggest that human evolution across Eurasia involved not just the expansion and replacement of populations, but a complex process of intermixing and genetic exchange that created a mosaic of human diversity far more complex than simple models of species replacement can capture. As Homo sapiens expanded out of Africa and across Asia, they encountered not empty landscapes but regions already occupied by other human species who had been adapting to local conditions for hundreds of thousands of years, leading to episodes of interbreeding that enriched the genetic diversity of our own species while also contributing to the eventual extinction of the archaic populations through a process of genetic absorption rather than simple competitive displacement. Yet these encounters also reveal the tragic dimension of human evolution. While genetic analysis shows that interbreeding occurred regularly between different human species, it also demonstrates that these hybrid populations were ultimately unsustainable, either because of genetic incompatibilities that reduced fertility, or because the expanding populations of Homo sapiens were so much larger that they eventually swamped the genetic contributions of the archaic species through sheer demographic weight. The Denisovans and Neanderthals may have contributed valuable genetic variants to our species, but they paid for this contribution with their existence as distinct populations, disappearing into the expanding human diaspora like tributaries flowing into a mighty river that carries forward some of their water while erasing their separate identity forever. In the story of human evolution, numbers often matter more than intelligence, strength, or adaptation. The simple arithmetic of population size, growth rates, and carrying capacity can determine which lineages survive and which disappear, regardless of their technological sophistication or environmental adaptations. When Homo sapiens began expanding out of Africa around 70,000 years ago, they carried with them not just new tool technologies and cultural innovations, but something even more powerful: demographic momentum. The exponential growth potential of a population that had developed new social structures, communication systems, and subsistence strategies that allowed them to sustain larger group sizes and more rapid population increase than any previous human species. The Denisovans, despite their remarkable success in adapting to the harsh conditions of northern Asia, appear to have maintained relatively small population sizes throughout their long history, a pattern typical of hunter-gatherer societies living in marginal environments where resources are sparse and unpredictable. Genetic analysis of the available Denisovan samples suggests effective population sizes in the low thousands, large enough to maintain genetic diversity and cultural continuity over many generations, but small enough to be vulnerable to demographic catastrophes such as severe climate events, disease outbreaks, or competition from more numerous rival populations. When modern humans began arriving in regions previously occupied only by Denisovans and Neanderthals, they brought with them population densities that may have been 10 to 20 times higher than those of the archaic species, creating demographic pressure that would have transformed the competitive landscape for resources across entire continents. Imagine the impact on Denisovan hunting grounds when valleys that had previously supported a few dozen individuals suddenly found themselves hosting several hundred modern humans, all competing for the same game animals, medicinal plants, tool-making materials, and shelter sites that had sustained archaic populations for hundreds of thousands of years. This demographic advantage was not simply a matter of raw numbers, but reflected fundamental differences in social organization and cultural transmission that allowed modern human populations to grow more rapidly and sustain larger group sizes without suffering the coordination problems that typically limit hunter-gatherer societies. While Denisovans appear to have lived in relatively small, probably nomadic groups that moved seasonally across large territories, modern humans developed more complex social networks, alliance systems, and resource-sharing mechanisms that allowed them to aggregate in larger numbers when necessary, while also maintaining cultural cohesion across much larger geographic areas. The archaeological record from this period shows a pattern of technological and cultural change that suggests modern human populations were not simply replacing archaic ones through direct competition, but transforming entire regional economies and ecological relationships in ways that made traditional archaic lifestyles increasingly difficult to maintain. New hunting technologies, more efficient resource extraction methods, and expanded trade networks allowed modern humans to exploit environments more intensively, potentially reducing the carrying capacity for other human species even without direct conflict or competition for specific resources. Population genetics provides additional evidence for the demographic pressures facing archaic human species during this period. The low genetic diversity found in both Neanderthal and Denisovan populations suggests they experienced significant population bottlenecks during the later phases of their existence, possibly as expanding modern human populations compressed them into smaller and smaller refugia, where inbreeding and genetic drift would have reduced their evolutionary fitness and made them even more vulnerable to environmental stresses and demographic fluctuations. The final disappearance of distinct Denisovan populations around 40,000 to 30,000 years ago coincides not only with severe climate change, but also with the peak expansion of modern human populations across Eurasia, suggesting that demographic pressure may have been the decisive factor that pushed already stressed archaic populations beyond their survival threshold. Even if Denisovans were equally well adapted to their environments and possessed comparable technological skills, they simply could not compete with the exponential growth potential of modern human societies that had developed new forms of social organization, cultural transmission, and demographic resilience. Yet the demographic story of Denisovan extinction is not simply one of replacement but of absorption. While distinct Denisovan populations disappeared, their genes survived through interbreeding with expanding modern human populations, creating a genetic legacy that persists in millions of people today. In this sense, the Denisovans were not conquered by superior competitors but absorbed into a larger demographic tide that preserved some of their most valuable adaptations while eliminating them as a distinct breeding population, a process that represents not victory or defeat but the complex dynamics of genetic and cultural evolution operating across vast spans of time and space. The stone tools scattered across the floor of Denisova Cave tell a story not just of survival, but of the constant innovation and adaptation that allowed the Denisovans to thrive in one of the world's most challenging environments for over 200,000 years. Yet they also reveal the technological limitations that may have contributed to their ultimate disappearance when they found themselves competing with modern human populations who had developed more sophisticated and efficient tool-making traditions that provided crucial advantages in resource extraction, hunting success, and environmental adaptation. During their early period of occupation, the Denisovans developed a sophisticated Middle Paleolithic technology that was remarkably similar to tool traditions found thousands of kilometers away in the caves of the Levant, suggesting either long-distance cultural transmission or parallel technological development across vast regions of Eurasia. Their toolkit included carefully crafted Lavalois cores that could produce multiple sharp flakes from a single piece of stone, specialized scrapers with precisely retouched edges for processing hides and working wood, and pointed tools that may have served as spear tips for hunting the large mammals that dominated the Pleistocene landscape of northern Asia. These tools represent hundreds of thousands of years of accumulated knowledge and cultural transmission, with techniques for stone knapping, tool design, and use-wear patterns passed down through countless generations of Denisovan craftspeople who refined and perfected their technologies through constant experimentation and adaptation to changing environmental conditions. Microscopic analysis of tool edges reveals sophisticated understanding of different materials and their properties, with evidence that Denisovans knew how to select specific types of stone for particular tasks and how to modify their tools through careful resharpening and recycling to extend their useful lives in an environment where raw materials were often scarce. Yet when modern humans began arriving in regions previously occupied by Denisovans, They brought with them technological innovations that represented a quantum leap in efficiency and sophistication, blade technology that could produce 3 times more cutting edge from the same amount of raw material, composite tools that combined multiple materials to create implements that were both lighter and more effective than anything made from stone alone, and specialized hunting equipment including atlas and later bows and arrows that allowed them to kill prey at greater distances and with higher success rates than traditional spear-throwing techniques. The technological gap between Denisovan and modern human tool traditions may seem small when viewed in isolation, but when multiplied across thousands of hunting trips, millions of tool use episodes, and hundreds of generations of cultural transmission, these small advantages could have accumulated into decisive competitive differences that affected everything from caloric intake and survival rates, to population growth and territorial expansion. More efficient hunting technologies meant more successful hunts, which translated into better nutrition, higher survival rates for children, and larger sustainable population sizes, while more efficient tool production meant less time spent on tool manufacture, and more time available for other survival activities. The archaeological record suggests that Denisovan tool technology remained relatively stable throughout their long occupation of the Altai, showing gradual refinement and local adaptation, but no major technological breakthroughs comparable to the innovations that characterized modern human societies during the same period. This technological conservatism may have been an adaptive strategy in a stable environment where traditional methods had proven successful over hundreds of thousands of years, but it may have become a liability when environmental conditions became more challenging and competition from technologically superior populations intensified. The discovery of organic residues on Denisovan tools provides intimate glimpses into their daily lives and survival strategies. Fatty acids preserved on scraper edges reveal that these tools were used to process animal skins, probably for making clothing and shelter materials essential for survival in the harsh Siberian climate, while the absence of plant residues suggests a diet focused heavily on animal resources, possibly making Denisovan populations more vulnerable to changes in prey animal availability than groups with more diversified subsistence strategies. By contrast, modern human tool assemblages from the same period show evidence of much more diverse resource exploitation, including specialized tools for processing plant foods, fishing equipment for exploiting aquatic resources, and sewing needles that allowed for the production of tailored clothing that provided superior protection against cold weather. These technological innovations may have allowed modern human populations to extract more resources from the same environments, exploit a wider range of ecological niches, and maintain larger population sizes even under deteriorating environmental conditions, providing crucial advantages during the period of climate instability that coincided with Denisovan extinction. The final irony is that while Denisovan tool technology disappeared along with the people who created it, some of their genetic adaptations proved more durable than their cultural innovations, persisting in modern human populations long after their tools were abandoned and their knowledge forgotten. In this sense, the Denisovans succeeded in transmitting their most valuable survival information not through cultural learning but through biological inheritance, ensuring that their hard-won adaptations to challenging environments would continue to benefit human survival long after their own societies had vanished from the Earth. As climate conditions deteriorated and modern human populations expanded across Eurasia, the once vast territories inhabited by Denisovans began to shrink like islands in a rising sea, compressing these ancient people into smaller and smaller refugia, where they could still maintain their traditional lifestyles and compete successfully for the resources they needed to survive. The Altai Mountains, with their complex topography of valleys, caves, and diverse microenvironments, became one of the last strongholds where Denisovan populations could retreat from the pressures of a changing world and continue their ancient ways of life even as their species approached the edge of extinction. The geography of the Altai provided crucial advantages for human survival during periods of environmental stress. The region's elevation created a series of climatic zones that allowed populations to move seasonally between different environments as conditions changed, while the limestone caves offered reliable shelter that was defensible against both harsh weather and potential competitors. During glacial periods, when much of northern Eurasia became uninhabitable, the Altai remained a refugium where trees could still grow in protected valleys, where springs provided reliable water sources, and where enough plant and animal diversity persisted to support small human populations throughout even the harshest climatic episodes. Archaeological evidence suggests that Denisovan occupation of the cave became more intensive during the later periods of their existence, with artifact densities reaching extraordinary levels that indicate either larger group sizes or more frequent occupation as populations were compressed into smaller territories. The cave may have served not just as seasonal shelter, but as a permanent base camp where multiple families could aggregate during difficult periods, sharing resources and knowledge while maintaining the social cohesion necessary for cultural transmission and group survival in an increasingly challenging world. Yet even in these refugia, the Denisovans faced mounting pressures that may have pushed them beyond their adaptive limits. Climate records from the region show increasingly unstable conditions during the period of their disappearance, with rapid shifts between warm and cold phases that would have made traditional seasonal planning nearly impossible and created chronic uncertainty about resource availability and environmental conditions. Imagine trying to decide when to begin preparing for winter when the climate itself had become unpredictable, when the knowledge accumulated over thousands of generations no longer provided reliable guidance for survival decisions. The faunal remains from the latest Denisovan layers tell a story of increasing stress and adaptation challenges. The diversity of prey species begins to decline, suggesting either environmental degradation or increased hunting pressure that reduced the availability of traditional food resources, while cut marks on bones show evidence of more intensive processing techniques that may indicate populations were trying to extract maximum nutrition from increasingly scarce kills. These changes in subsistence patterns suggest populations under stress, forced to work harder for fewer calories while facing greater uncertainty about their next meal. Genetic evidence from the final Denisovan populations shows signs of demographic stress that would have made them even more vulnerable to environmental pressures and competition from other human groups. Reduced genetic diversity suggests population bottlenecks that would have increased inbreeding and reduced evolutionary fitness, while the apparent isolation of different Denisovan lineages indicates that populations had become fragmented into small groups with limited gene flow between them, a pattern typical of species approaching extinction as their populations become too small and scattered to maintain viable breeding networks. The arrival of modern human populations in the Altai, during this period of environmental and demographic stress, may have been the final factor that pushed Denisovan populations beyond their survival threshold. Even without direct conflict, the presence of more numerous and technologically sophisticated competitors would have increased pressure on already stressed resources and reduced the carrying capacity of refugia that had previously supported Denisovan populations for thousands of years. The archaeological record shows evidence of modern human occupation at Denisova Cave, beginning around 45,000 years ago, shortly before the last evidence of Denisovan presence at the site. Yet the story of these final refugia is not simply one of inevitable decline and extinction, but also of remarkable persistence and adaptation in the face of overwhelming challenges. The Denisovans survived in the Altai for at least 200,000 years, weathering multiple glacial cycles, volcanic eruptions and other environmental catastrophes that eliminated many other species from the region. Their ultimate disappearance may have been less a failure of adaptation than the result of a perfect storm of environmental, demographic, and competitive pressures that overwhelmed even the most successful survival strategies developed by any human species up to that point in evolutionary history. The caves where they made their last stand still echo with the memory of their presence. Soot stains on limestone walls, stone tools scattered in ancient sediments, and fragments of bone that preserve the genetic legacy of a people who came so close to surviving into the modern world that we can still read their DNA in laboratories today. They represent not just another extinct human species, but the end of an entire branch of human evolution that had persisted for hundreds of thousands of years before being swept away in the demographic and environmental transformations that ultimately gave rise to our modern world. In the sterile laboratories of the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, scientists work with fragments of bone so small they could be mistaken for pebbles, extracting from them molecular stories that span hundreds of thousands of years and reveal the intimate details of lives lived in the deep past. Every successful DNA extraction from a Denisovan bone is a minor miracle, a triumph of technology over time, that allows us to read genetic information that has survived longer than entire civilizations, longer than our species has had written language, longer than the ice ages that sculpted the continents themselves into their current forms. The DNA molecules extracted from these ancient bones are themselves witnesses to the process of extinction, carrying within their chemical structure the signatures of demographic collapse, population fragmentation, and genetic isolation that preceded the final disappearance of Denisovan populations. When geneticists analyze the diversity and patterns of mutations in Denisovan genomes, they can reconstruct not just family relationships and population history, but the precise demographic events that led to extinction, reading in molecular detail the story of a species' final decades and centuries as their populations dwindled and their genetic diversity eroded beyond the point of recovery. The most remarkable discovery has been the identification of at least 3 distinct Denisovan lineages that appear to have been geographically and temporally separated, suggesting that what we call Denisovans was actually a diverse group of related populations spread across different regions of Asia and adapting to different environmental conditions over hundreds of thousands of years. The Denisovan DNA found in modern Tibetan populations appears to come from a lineage distinct from the Siberian cave populations, while the Denisovan ancestry in Papuan and Filipino populations derives from yet another lineage that may have occupied Southeast Asia and never been present in the fossil record at all. This genetic diversity reveals both the success and the vulnerability of Denisovan populations. Their geographic spread across vast areas of Asia demonstrates remarkable adaptability and evolutionary success, but their fragmentation into isolated lineages also made them vulnerable to local extinctions that could eliminate entire branches of their evolutionary tree without affecting other populations. Unlike modern humans, who maintained extensive gene flow between distant populations through migration and trade networks, the Denisovans appear to have become increasingly isolated in separate refugia where they evolved distinctive genetic signatures but lost the demographic resilience that comes from being part of a larger, interconnected population. The timing of genetic divergences between different Denisovan lineages also provides crucial insights into the process of extinction. Molecular clock analyses suggest that the major Denisovan populations began separating from each other around 300,000 years ago, long before the arrival of modern humans in Asia, indicating that population fragmentation was an ongoing process driven by environmental and geographic factors rather than simply a response to competition from our own species. This suggests that Denisovans may have been inherently vulnerable to extinction due to their population structure and demographic patterns, making them susceptible to elimination even without direct pressure from competing human populations. Perhaps most intriguingly, the ancient DNA reveals evidence of interbreeding not just between Denisovans and other human species, but potentially between Denisovans and even more archaic human lineages that have left no fossil record. Some Denisovan genomes contain what researchers call super-archaic DNA sequences that appear to derive from a population that diverged from other humans over 1 million years ago, possibly representing genetic contributions from Asian Homo erectus populations or other unknown archaic species that survived much later than previously thought and contributed to the genetic makeup of Denisovan populations. The molecular evidence also reveals the remarkable speed with which extinction occurred once it began. While Denisovan populations persisted in some regions for over 200,000 years, their final disappearance appears to have happened relatively rapidly, with the latest reliable evidence for their existence dating to around 30,000 years ago in Siberia. This pattern suggests that extinction was not a gradual process of decline but rather a relatively sudden demographic collapse that may have been triggered by specific environmental events or competitive pressures that overwhelmed their adaptive capacity within just a few thousand years. Yet the ancient DNA also tells a story of survival through genetic integration. While no purely Denisovan populations exist today, their genetic legacy persists in millions of modern humans who carry Denisovan alleles that continue to provide adaptive advantages in challenging environments. In this sense, the molecular evidence reveals that extinction and survival in human evolution are not simple binary states, but complex processes involving genetic mixing, population replacement, and the preservation of adaptive traits across species boundaries through interbreeding and natural selection. The laboratory techniques that make these discoveries possible represent one of the greatest achievements of modern science: the ability to extract, sequence, and analyze DNA that has survived for hundreds of thousands of years in harsh environments, providing direct access to genetic information from extinct populations and revealing the molecular basis of evolutionary processes that shaped human diversity. Every successful ancient DNA extraction brings us closer to understanding not just what happened to the Denisovans, but how extinction and survival operate at the molecular level in human evolution, offering insights that may help us understand the vulnerabilities and resilience factors that determine which populations persist and which disappear in the face of environmental and competitive challenges. Across the vast steppes and forests of Eurasia, a transformation was beginning that would reshape the entire human landscape and ultimately determine which lineages would survive and which would vanish into the depths of deep time. Around 70,000 years ago, populations of Homo sapiens began expanding out of Africa, carrying with them not just new technologies and cultural innovations, but a revolutionary package of cognitive and social capabilities that would allow them to adapt to virtually any environment on Earth and outcompete every other human species they encountered in their inexorable spread across the planet. This expansion was not a simple migration, but a wave of demographic and cultural transformation that swept across continents at unprecedented speed, driven by population growth rates and adaptive flexibility that had never been seen before in human evolution. Within just 40,000 years, modern humans had spread from Africa to Australia, from the Arctic tundra to tropical islands, establishing successful populations in environments where no human had ever lived before, and doing so with a speed and thoroughness that left no room for the archaic human populations that had occupied these regions for hundreds of thousands of years. What made this expansion so successful was not any single innovation but rather a constellation of behavioral and cognitive changes that anthropologists call the behavioral revolution. The development of complex language, symbolic thought, long-distance trade networks, and sophisticated social organization that allowed modern human groups to coordinate activities across larger territories, maintain cultural knowledge over longer time periods, and respond to environmental challenges with unprecedented flexibility and innovation. These capabilities provided modern humans with adaptive advantages that were cumulative and self-reinforcing, creating positive feedback loops that accelerated their spread and intensified their competitive impact on other human species. The archaeological record from this period shows a pattern of technological and cultural change that suggests modern humans were not simply replacing archaic populations through direct competition, but transforming entire regional economies and ecological relationships in ways that made traditional archaic lifestyles increasingly difficult to maintain. New hunting technologies allowed more efficient resource extraction, expanded trade networks provided access to raw materials from distant sources, and more sophisticated tool-making traditions produced implements that were lighter, more durable, and more versatile than anything created by earlier human species. For the Denisovans, who had successfully adapted to the harsh conditions of northern Asia through hundreds of thousands of years of evolution and cultural development, the arrival of modern human populations represented an unprecedented challenge that their traditional survival strategies were not equipped to handle. While they had proven remarkably successful at competing with other archaic human species and adapting to environmental changes, they had never faced competitors with the demographic growth potential, technological sophistication, and adaptive flexibility of expanding Homo sapiens populations. The speed of modern human expansion meant that Denisovan populations had little time to develop counter-strategies or adapt to the new competitive landscape. Archaeological evidence suggests that modern humans reached the Altai region around 45,000 years ago, and within just 10,000 to 15,000 years, all evidence of distinct Denisovan populations disappears from the fossil record. This represents an incredibly rapid transformation for human evolutionary standards, suggesting that the competitive pressures created by modern human expansion were overwhelming and immediate rather than gradual and manageable. Yet the expansion of Homo sapiens was not simply a story of conquest and replacement, but also one of genetic and cultural exchange that created new forms of human diversity and adaptation. As modern humans encountered Denisovan populations across Asia, they interbred with them regularly enough to acquire genetic variants that provided crucial survival advantages in specific environments, while also absorbing cultural knowledge and technological innovations that enhanced their own adaptive capabilities. This process of genetic and cultural mixing may have actually accelerated modern human expansion by providing them with pre-adapted genetic variants for high-altitude survival, disease resistance, and other environmental challenges they encountered as they spread into new regions. The demographic impact of modern human expansion was probably the most decisive factor in Denisovan extinction, even if individual modern humans were not necessarily superior to Denisovans in terms of survival skills or environmental adaptation. They were part of expanding populations that could sustain much higher growth rates and population densities than any previous human species. This demographic advantage meant that modern humans could afford higher casualty rates in competition for resources, could recover more quickly from environmental disasters, and could maintain genetic diversity and cultural continuity even when individual local populations suffered severe losses. The final disappearance of Denisovan populations around 30,000 years ago coincides not just with the peak of modern human expansion across Eurasia, but also with the development of increasingly sophisticated modern human technologies including advanced hunting equipment, textile production, and artistic expression that suggest cognitive and cultural capabilities that surpassed anything achieved by earlier human species. The Denisovans, despite their remarkable success in surviving for hundreds of thousands of years in challenging environments, ultimately found themselves outmatched by a species whose adaptive potential was not limited by any single environment or survival strategy, but was instead capable of continuous innovation and expansion into any ecological niche on Earth. In the final millennia of Denisovan existence, the archaeological record from Denisova Cave tells a story of a people under increasing pressure, their ancient rhythms of life disrupted by forces beyond their control or understanding. The sediment layers from this period contain fewer artifacts, suggesting smaller group sizes or less frequent occupation, while changes in tool technology and subsistence patterns indicate populations struggling to maintain their traditional ways of life in the face of environmental deterioration and intensifying competition for dwindling resources. The climate records from this time reveal some of the harshest conditions of the entire Pleistocene, with temperatures dropping so low that even the hardy vegetation of the Altai steppes began to disappear, replaced by barren tundra that could support only the most cold-adapted species. For people who had survived countless ice ages through their intimate knowledge of local environments and seasonal patterns, this level of environmental instability may have pushed their adaptive capabilities beyond their limits, forcing them to make survival decisions without the guidance of traditional ecological knowledge that had sustained their ancestors for thousands of generations. Archaeological evidence suggests that the final Denisovan populations may have been increasingly confined to the cave itself, using it not just as seasonal shelter, but as a permanent refuge from a world that had become too harsh and unpredictable to support their traditional nomadic lifestyle. The concentration of artifacts in the upper layers indicates intensive occupation by groups that may have had nowhere else to go, their territorial ranges compressed by climate change and competitive pressure into an area so small that it could no longer sustainably support even a minimal population of hunter-gatherers. The animal bones from these final layers tell a story of dietary stress and resource scarcity. The diversity of prey species continues to decline, while evidence of more intensive bone processing suggests populations extracting maximum nutrition from increasingly rare successful hunts. Cut marks on bones show patterns consistent with systematic marrow extraction and even the processing of bones that would normally have been discarded, indicating levels of resource stress that would have made population maintenance extremely difficult and demographic growth virtually impossible. Genetic analysis of bones from this period reveals signs of severe population bottlenecks and inbreeding that would have reduced evolutionary fitness and made these final Denisovan groups even more vulnerable to environmental stresses and competitive pressures, with effective population sizes dropping below levels necessary for long-term viability. These last populations may have been caught in a demographic death spiral where reduced genetic diversity led to lower survival rates, which further reduced population sizes and genetic diversity in a downward cycle that ultimately led to extinction. The appearance of modern human artifacts in the cave around 45,000 years ago marks the beginning of the end for Denisovan occupation of their ancient stronghold. While there is no direct evidence of conflict or competition, The simple presence of more numerous and technologically sophisticated competitors would have increased pressure on resources that were already stressed by climate change and demographic decline, creating a perfect storm of challenges that may have overwhelmed even the most successful survival strategies developed by the Denisovans over their long history in the region. Yet even in their final millennia, the Denisovans continued to demonstrate the adaptability and resilience that had allowed them to survive for so long in one of the world's most challenging environments. They modified their tool technologies to work with increasingly scarce raw materials, developed new hunting strategies to pursue the cold-adapted species that had replaced their traditional prey, and maintained the social cohesion necessary for cultural transmission even as their populations dwindled and their territorial ranges contracted. The last reliable evidence of Denisovan presence at their namesake cave dates to around 50,000 years ago, though genetic evidence suggests that isolated populations may have persisted elsewhere in Asia until as recently as 30,000 years ago. Imagine the final group to occupy this ancient shelter, a handful of individuals who represented the endpoint of an evolutionary lineage that stretched back hundreds of thousands of years, lighting their fires in chambers where countless generations of their ancestors had found refuge from the storms of the Pleistocene world. What thoughts passed through their minds as they looked out from the cave mouth across a landscape that their people had called home since before the last interglacial, knowing perhaps that they were among the last of their kind, carrying within their genes and their memories the accumulated wisdom of 250,000 years of human adaptation to the harsh beauty of the Altai Mountains? Did they sense that they were witnessing the end of an era, the closing of a chapter in human evolution that would never be repeated, or did they simply focus on the immediate challenges of survival, the daily tasks of finding food and shelter and warmth that had occupied their ancestors since the beginning of time? The cave itself preserves the memory of their presence, soot stains on limestone walls that will last for thousands more years, stone tools that still bear the microscopic traces of their use, and fragments of bone that contain within their molecular structure the genetic legacy of a people who came so close to surviving into the modern world that we can still read their stories in the laboratories of the 21st century. They are gone now, vanished as completely as if they had never existed, yet their genes live on in millions of people across Asia and Oceania, helping Tibetan climbers breathe easily at high altitudes and protecting children in Papua New Guinea from tropical diseases, ensuring that something of the Denisovans will persist as long as humanity itself survives on this planet. Though the last Denisovan died tens of thousands of years ago, their legacy persists in ways that would have seemed impossible to imagine until the development of modern genetic sequencing technologies revealed the hidden history written in our DNA. Across the vast expanse of Asia and Oceania, millions of people carry within their cells the genetic memory of these vanished people, ancient adaptations that continue to shape human survival and biology in the modern world, ensuring that the Denisovans never truly went extinct, but instead became part of the expanding story of human diversity and resilience. In the laboratories where scientists study ancient DNA, every new genome sequenced from modern populations reveals additional evidence of Denisovan ancestry, painting an increasingly complex picture of interbreeding, migration, and genetic persistence that challenges simple narratives of extinction and replacement. The Denisovan genetic legacy is not evenly distributed across human populations but shows distinct geographic patterns that reflect the complex history of encounters between expanding modern humans and established archaic populations across different regions and time periods, creating a genetic geography that maps the final chapters of Denisovan existence and their integration into the broader human story. The most remarkable examples of Denisovan genetic persistence can be found in populations that still live in some of the most challenging environments on Earth. The same harsh conditions that originally selected for the adaptations that made Denisovans successful now continue to favor the survival and reproduction of people who carry their genetic variants. On the high plateaus of Tibet and the tropical islands of Southeast Asia, in the Arctic regions of Siberia and the mountain highlands of Papua New Guinea, Denisovan alleles continue to provide survival advantages that demonstrate the value of genetic diversity and the importance of preserving adaptive variants even when the populations that originally carried them have vanished. Recent research has identified specific Denisovan gene variants that affect everything from immune system function and high-altitude adaptation to skin pigmentation and hair texture, revealing the breadth of biological traits that can be inherited across species boundaries through interbreeding. Some of these variants appear to provide protection against infectious diseases that have plagued human populations for thousands of years, while others help regulate physiological responses to environmental stresses like cold temperatures, low oxygen levels, and intense solar radiation, demonstrating that the Denisovans had evolved sophisticated biological solutions to survival challenges that remain relevant for human populations today. The distribution of Denisovan ancestry in modern populations also provides insights into the final phases of Denisovan existence and the geographic extent of their populations at the time of extinction. The highest levels of Denisovan ancestry are found in island Southeast Asia and Melanesia, suggesting that some Denisovan populations may have persisted in these regions long after they disappeared from their Siberian strongholds, possibly surviving until as recently as 15,000 to 20,000 years ago in isolated refugia, where they continued to interbreed with modern human populations and contribute to their genetic diversity. Genetic analysis has revealed that different modern human populations carry Denisovan ancestry from at least 2 and possibly 3 distinct Denisovan lineages, indicating that the process of interbreeding and genetic exchange occurred multiple times across different regions and involved genetically diverse Denisovan populations that had been separated for hundreds of thousands of years. This pattern suggests that Denisovan extinction was not a single event but rather a complex process involving the gradual absorption of multiple distinct populations into expanding modern human groups across vast areas of Asia and Oceania. The medical implications of Denisovan genetic persistence are only beginning to be understood, but early research suggests that some Denisovan alleles may provide important health benefits for modern populations, including enhanced immune responses to certain pathogens, improved adaptation to environmental stresses, and potentially even protection against some modern diseases. Understanding these genetic contributions may help medical researchers develop better treatments for conditions that disproportionately affect populations with high levels of archaic ancestry, while also providing insights into human genetic diversity and the evolutionary history of disease resistance. Perhaps most remarkably, new techniques for analyzing ancient DNA are revealing that the Denisovan genetic legacy may be even more extensive than previously thought, with recent studies identifying possible Denisovan ancestry in populations across Asia, the Pacific, and even the Americas, suggesting that these ancient people may have contributed to human genetic diversity on a truly global scale through their interbreeding with the ancestors of populations that subsequently spread to every inhabited continent on Earth. The persistence of Denisovan DNA in modern populations also raises profound questions about the nature of extinction and species boundaries in human evolution. If genetic variants from extinct species continue to provide adaptive advantages for modern populations, can we really say that these species are truly extinct, or have they instead achieved a form of genetic immortality through their integration into surviving lineages? The Denisovans may have lost their cultural traditions, their languages, and their distinct identity as a people, but their genes continue to help their genetic descendants thrive in challenging environments, ensuring that something essential of their evolutionary success persists even after their complete disappearance as a distinct population. In this sense, the story of Denisovan extinction becomes not just a tale of loss and disappearance, but also one of transformation and persistence, revealing how evolution operates not through simple replacement but through complex processes of genetic mixing, natural selection, and adaptive inheritance that can preserve the most valuable traits from extinct lineages, while incorporating them into the ongoing story of human survival and adaptation on a planet where environmental challenges and evolutionary pressures continue to shape the trajectory of our species and the genetic legacy we will leave for future generations. When the last Denisovan died sometime around 30,000 years ago, the world lost more than just another human population. It lost an entire way of being human, a unique solution to the challenges of survival that had been refined and perfected over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution and cultural development in some of the most demanding environments on Earth. Their disappearance represents not just demographic extinction but cultural extinction, the irreversible loss of knowledge, traditions and innovations that had sustained human life in regions where no other species could survive, leaving gaps in the human story that can never be filled despite all the advances of modern archaeology and genetic analysis. The Denisovans possessed intimate knowledge of Arctic and subarctic environments that took countless generations to accumulate, understanding the subtle signs that predicted weather changes, the behavioral patterns of now extinct megafauna, the properties of plants and minerals that could mean the difference between life and death during the harsh Siberian winters. This knowledge, encoded not in written language but in the minds and practices of the people themselves, vanished with them as completely as if it had never existed, leaving us to reconstruct from fragmentary archaeological evidence what must have been sophisticated and nuanced understandings of ecological relationships and survival strategies. Their tool technologies, while simpler than those developed by later modern human populations, represented unique solutions to the challenges of working stone, bone, and organic materials in extreme cold conditions where conventional techniques might fail. The specific methods they used to create and maintain their implements, the ways they adapted their technologies to work with locally available raw materials, and the innovations they developed for surviving in environments that pushed the limits of human adaptability are all lost now, leaving behind only the finished products whose manufacturing techniques we can only guess at through experimental archaeology and microscopic analysis. We can only imagine what their languages sounded like as they echoed through the limestone chambers of Denisova Cave, what stories they told to pass long winter nights, what songs they sang while working on tools or processing hides, what names they gave to the mountains and valleys that formed their homeland for thousands of generations. These languages, which must have contained vocabularies perfectly adapted to describing the subtle variations in snow conditions, wind patterns, and animal behavior that were crucial for survival, died with their speakers and left no trace in the archaeological record, though their genetic legacy suggests they may have passed some of their knowledge to modern human populations through interbreeding and cultural exchange. The social structures and kinship systems that allowed Denisovan groups to maintain genetic diversity and cultural continuity across vast territories and long time periods are also lost to us, though genetic analysis suggests they developed successful strategies for avoiding inbreeding and maintaining viable population sizes even in the harsh conditions of northern Asia. Their solutions to the challenges of cooperation, resource sharing, and conflict resolution that must have been essential for survival in small groups facing constant environmental pressures could offer valuable insights for modern societies, but these social innovations vanished along with the people who created and practiced them. Perhaps most significantly, we lost the opportunity to learn from a human population that had successfully adapted to climate change on a scale and timeline that dwarfs anything our own species has experienced. The Denisovans survived multiple glacial cycles, volcanic eruptions, and other environmental catastrophes that would have challenged the adaptive capacity of any human society, yet they persisted for hundreds of thousands of years through a combination of technological innovation, social cooperation, and ecological knowledge that allowed them to thrive in conditions that would defeat most modern populations. Their artistic traditions, spiritual beliefs, and symbolic systems are also lost to us, though the sophistication of their tool technologies and the evidence for long-distance cultural exchange suggest they must have possessed rich traditions of creative expression and meaning-making. We will never know what symbols they carved into wood or painted on cave walls, what rituals they performed to mark important life transitions, what myths they created to explain their place in the cosmos, or what aesthetic principles guided their choices in tool design and personal ornamentation. The disappearance of the Denisovans also represents the loss of genetic diversity that could have provided modern human populations with additional adaptive variants for surviving in extreme environments. While we carry some Denisovan alleles that continue to provide survival advantages, the complete genomes of extinct Denisovan populations contained thousands of genetic variants that might have proven valuable for adapting to future environmental challenges, climate changes, or disease outbreaks that could threaten human survival in coming centuries. On a deeper level, the extinction of the Denisovans reminds us of the fragility of human existence and the ease with which entire ways of life can disappear forever, leaving behind only fragmentary traces in the archaeological record. Their vanishing serves as a sobering reminder that survival is never guaranteed, that even the most successful adaptations can prove insufficient when environmental and competitive pressures reach critical thresholds, and that the diversity of human experience has been permanently reduced by the loss of perspectives and knowledge systems that took hundreds of thousands of years to develop and can never be recovered. Yet in mourning what was lost with the Denisovans, we also celebrate what they achieved during their long presence on Earth. They proved that humans could adapt to virtually any environment through a combination of biological evolution, technological innovation, and cultural creativity. They contributed genetic variants that continue to help modern populations survive in challenging conditions, and they demonstrated the remarkable resilience and adaptability that characterizes our species even in its most archaic forms. Their legacy reminds us that human survival depends not just on individual fitness but on the preservation of diversity in all its forms, genetic and cultural, technological and social, ensuring that our species retains the adaptive flexibility necessary to face whatever challenges the future might bring. As we stand at the entrance to Denisova Cave today, looking out across the same valleys and mountains that sheltered the last of their kind 40,000 years ago, we carry with us not just the weight of their absence, but the responsibility of understanding what their story means for our own species' future on this planet. The Denisovans were not some primitive ancestor, but a sophisticated human population that mastered one of Earth's most challenging environments, developed complex technologies and social systems, and survived longer than our own civilization has existed. Yet they still succumbed to forces that proved beyond their adaptive capacity to overcome. Their extinction offers sobering lessons about the limits of human adaptability and the vulnerability of even the most successful populations to environmental change, demographic pressure, and competitive displacement. Despite hundreds of thousands of years of successful adaptation to ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and other environmental catastrophes, the Denisovans ultimately could not withstand the perfect storm of climate instability, expanding modern human populations, and resource competition that characterized their final millennia, reminding us that no human society, no matter how well adapted or technologically sophisticated, is immune to extinction when multiple stresses align to create existential challenges. The speed with which Denisovan populations disappeared once the extinction process began also provides crucial insights into how demographic collapse can occur. Populations that had persisted for hundreds of thousands of years vanished completely within just a few millennia, suggesting that extinction in human societies may not be a gradual process of decline but rather a sudden tipping point phenomenon, where multiple negative factors combine to push populations beyond their recovery threshold with little warning and minimal opportunity for adaptive response. Yet the Denisovan story also demonstrates the remarkable resilience and persistence that can characterize human genetic and cultural evolution even in the face of population extinction. While no purely Denisovan populations survived, their genetic contributions continue to provide adaptive advantages for millions of modern humans, while their technological innovations and survival strategies may have influenced the cultural development of the modern human populations that replaced them, ensuring that something of their evolutionary success persisted even after their complete disappearance as a distinct group. The discovery and study of the Denisovans has revolutionized our understanding of human evolution and diversity, revealing that the story of our species is far more complex and interconnected than previously imagined. Rather than a simple linear progression from archaic to modern forms, human evolution involved intricate networks of migration, interbreeding, and cultural exchange that created genetic and cultural diversity through mixing rather than replacement, while also demonstrating that extinction and survival in human evolution are not mutually exclusive outcomes but can occur simultaneously through processes of genetic absorption and cultural transformation. Their legacy also highlights the importance of preserving genetic and cultural diversity as insurance against future environmental and social challenges. The Denisovan alleles that help modern Tibetans survive at high altitudes and protect Melanesian populations from tropical diseases demonstrate how genetic variants that evolved in one population and environment can provide crucial survival advantages for other populations facing different challenges, suggesting that maintaining human genetic diversity may be essential for our species' long-term survival in an uncertain and changing world. The ongoing research into Denisovan genetics and archaeology continues to yield new discoveries that reshape our understanding of human evolution and the complex factors that determine which populations survive and which disappear. Each new bone fragment analyzed, each ancient DNA sequence decoded, and each genetic variant identified in modern populations adds another piece to the puzzle of human evolutionary history, while also providing insights that may help us better understand the challenges facing human populations today and in the future. The methods and technologies that have allowed us to discover and study the Denisovans, ancient DNA analysis, advanced archaeological techniques, and sophisticated genetic sequencing, represent some of the greatest achievements of modern science and demonstrate our species' remarkable ability to reconstruct and understand our own evolutionary history, even when direct evidence is fragmentary and incomplete. These same technologies may also provide tools for monitoring and responding to contemporary threats to human genetic and cultural diversity, offering hope that we can learn from the past to better protect human populations that face similar challenges today. The ethical implications of Denisovan research also deserve consideration as we extract genetic information from the remains of extinct populations and use that information to understand modern human biology and evolution. We bear responsibility for treating these ancient people with the respect and dignity they deserve as our evolutionary cousins and genetic contributors. Their bones and DNA are not just scientific specimens, but the mortal remains of people who lived, loved, struggled, and died in pursuit of survival and meaning just as we do today. Perhaps most importantly, the Denisovan story reminds us that human extinction is not just a theoretical possibility, but a historical reality that has already occurred multiple times in our evolutionary past. While our own species has proven remarkably successful at surviving and spreading across the planet, we are not immune to the same demographic, environmental and competitive pressures that eliminated other human populations, making it crucial that we understand these extinction processes and work to maintain the genetic, cultural and technological diversity that may be essential for our long-term survival as a species. The mountains of the Altai still stand as silent witnesses to the rise and fall of human populations across hundreds of thousands of years, reminding us that survival is an active process requiring constant adaptation, cooperation, and innovation rather than a passive state that can be taken for granted. In honoring the memory of the Denisovans and studying their extinction, we honor both our shared humanity and our responsibility to ensure that the lessons learned from their disappearance help guide our own species toward a more sustainable and resilient future on this planet we all call home. Night settles over Denisova Cave as it has for countless millennia, bringing with it the same ancient silence that once surrounded the last of their kind as they tended their fires and gazed out into the darkness of an uncertain future. The stars that shine down on these mountains tonight are the same stars that guided Denisovan hunters across the steppes, the same constellations that marked the seasons by which they planned their migrations and prepared for the harsh winters that tested their survival skills, generation after generation across the vast expanse of deep time. In the end, the question of why the Denisovans vanished from the earth admits no simple answer, no single cause that can explain the disappearance of a people who had proven their mastery of survival through hundreds of thousands of years of successful adaptation to one of the world's most challenging environments. Their extinction was not the result of any single failure, but rather the convergence of multiple pressures: climate change, demographic competition, genetic isolation, and technological displacement, that combined to create conditions beyond even their remarkable adaptive capacity to overcome. Yet in vanishing, they also achieved a kind of immortality, their genes continuing to flow through the bloodlines of millions of people across Asia and Oceania, their ancient adaptations still helping human beings survive in the high mountains of Tibet and the tropical islands of the Pacific, their genetic legacy ensuring that something essential of their evolutionary success will persist as long as humanity itself endures. They are gone, but not forgotten, extinct but not erased, vanished from the earth, but preserved in the very molecules that make us who we are today. The story of the Denisovans reminds us that we are all part of a conversation that began millions of years ago with the first human footsteps on African soil, and continues today in laboratories where scientists decode ancient DNA, in mountain villages where people carry genetic gifts from vanished cousins, And in moments like this, when we pause to remember and honor those who came before us, we are the inheritors of their struggles and their successes, the carriers of their genetic legacy and the guardians of their memory, responsible for ensuring that their story is not forgotten, and that the lessons of their extinction inform our own efforts to build a sustainable future for human civilization. As you listen to these words, wherever you are in the world, and whatever time of day or night surrounds you, you are participating in this ancient conversation between past and present, between the vanished and the living, between the extinct and the surviving. The Denisovans speak to us still through the genetic variants they left behind, through the archaeological traces of their presence, and through the questions their extinction raises about the fragility and resilience of human existence on this planet we all share. Their vanishing teaches us that survival is never guaranteed, that even the most successful adaptations can prove insufficient when environmental and competitive pressures reach critical thresholds, but also that extinction and survival are not mutually exclusive states in the complex web of evolutionary relationships that connect all human populations across time and space. In studying their disappearance, we honor their memory while also preparing ourselves for the challenges that lie ahead, using their legacy to build greater resilience, preserve greater diversity, and create more sustainable relationships with the environments that sustain us. The conversation continues, and it includes all of us, past and present, extinct and living, vanished and surviving, in an ongoing dialogue about what it means to be human, what it takes to survive, and what responsibilities we bear toward each other, and toward the planet that has been home to so many different kinds of humanity across the vast reaches of evolutionary time. Thank you for joining me on this journey through deep time to explore the mystery of why the Denisovans vanished from the Earth. If this story has moved you, please subscribe to continue these explorations into the hidden chapters of human history, and let me know in the comments what other mysteries from our ancient past you'd like to see explored in future videos. Until next time, remember that we are all part of the same human story, carriers of ancient legacies and creators of future possibilities, temporary guardians of a genetic and cultural heritage that stretches back to the very dawn of our species and forward to whatever future awaits humanity among the stars.